Matthew, off to you.
Good morning.
All right, if you can share your screen and then I can introduce you and then we can go from there.
Sounds good.
All right, so our next speaker is Matthew, who is a strategy, M&A, and innovation expert with a background in market intelligence, consulting, and international trade. Matthew led the development of new business units from 0 to 300 employees in his first 3 years through a mix of acquisition, open innovation, and organic initiatives by leading strategy, deals, integration, and CEO board level reporting. Outside of the office, Matthew is a huge soccer fan and photographer lover. He gets it all done with a French-American perspective. All right, Matthew, off to you.
Thanks, Vlad. And nice meeting everyone. I want to make this a very engaging conversation. So, while the virtual format is not always the best for that, I encourage you to either use the chat or feel free to speak up at any point that you have a question. What I want to cover today is really a brief highlight of things that I've learned in my experience, as Vlad has described, with a little bit more details. I've been largely involved in large companies. Right now, my current employer is a publicly listed company called CCC in the insurance technology space. I was with UL, a multi-billion-dollar company before that. And within those companies, I'm usually the entrepreneur trying to launch new businesses, either organically, which I'm doing right now with CCC Payments, or inorganically by doing M&A, venture capital. I launched a venture capital fund a few years ago and the like. And then on the side, I've done a few entrepreneurship related ventures, including a startup that went through 500 startups, the accelerator. So that's my goal, is to try to always blend the two worlds. I understand, and I caught the tail end of the conversation. I know you have some questions about, okay, how do we do X, Y, and Z in a large company? Those are the kind of frustrations that I deal with every day. And I try to remain balanced in that perspective between what a startup can do and what a large company can do, and how do the two partner when they can. So first of all, why bother with this talk? Why bother with this whole program? I think I looked at the list, and some of you are in pricing. I think there might be someone in accounting. You all have different roles that up until somewhat recently, certainly when I started my career about 20 years ago, you would not be expected to be involved in innovation. Innovation was just a domain of the lab, the R&D folks, usually hidden in the basement and self-contained to a certain number of people, a certain budget, and that was it. That was innovation. The rest of the company was really more about operation. How do we actually, keep delivering and operating the company, but not necessarily innovation. Nowadays, I would argue that everybody's job, whether you're a lawyer, an accountant, or somebody in R&D or development, innovation is essential to what you do. Innovation of the product that you put out, your output to your stakeholders, whether they're customers or internal clients, if you will, or the way you do your work. Even if the end product doesn't change, you have to innovate in the way you do your work, because as you know, limitations on resources, you have to do today the same amount of work that maybe 3 people would have been expected to do 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so innovation is really permeating throughout all the layers of the organization, and certainly nobody is left untouched by it. More important than that, and that's actually a cultural aspect that I don't find often enough in large companies, people don't need to just accept innovation. People need to embrace it and drive it. The best organizations, the best performing ones, are the ones where the folks that are in the back office are also feeling ownership towards the innovation mission of the company. As you may have seen, although it's changing a little bit in the past year or so, companies get rewarded by the stock markets and private investors for growth and for innovation. Profitability is now less important than it was before, at least when it comes to improving your enterprise value. And as a result, it's really important that all of the different employees in any organization have an eye towards those things. It used to be cost cutting was actually a skill set that was in very high demand. Now, really anyone should always have an eye towards how do we increase the revenue per customer? How do we increase the revenue per distribution channel? However is the area that you have the ability to impact, the goal is towards growth and towards innovation, not towards efficiencies and necessarily cost savings, although those are obviously good. but that's not really what gets rewarded the most, right? If you generate an incremental dollar of revenue for the company, the enterprise value might go up by 3, 4, 5, or more, actually, in many cases, $10, $15. If you do some cost savings, obviously it's a good thing, but the reward is not going to be quite the same. So that's one of the reasons why everybody needs to be involved. It's just that's just where the visions of companies are nowadays. It's all about growing and innovating. The other reason is because innovation itself has changed drastically over what it was up until, I would say, about 2 decades ago. There's a framework that we're going to go over right now that was really traditional, and that was the closed innovation model. Sort of a funnel. Some of you that are familiar with sales might know this concept of the funnel. You think about all the opportunities that you have, and they're on the left-hand side. You have, let's say, 20 different projects that your R&D team is working on. And over time, as some of them fail, or you discover that they're not economically feasible or desirable, etc., it gets restricted to maybe 5 out of those 20 ending up in development and reaching the market. But the key aspect of this whole model is also that this funnel that you can see has thick borders. Everything was happening within the company, and it was a very linear process. If you wanted to invent a time machine, you thought that maybe it would take 20 years to do it, and you would need to bring all the resources in-house, most of them from the beginning, and then just push along that funnel until 20 years later, you have this product that's created, right? Over the past 20 years, there's a new paradigm that has become dominant, which is called the open innovation model. And the open innovation model is doing a few things to this. The first one is really about the timeliness of things. You don't have to start everything from A to Z. It's okay to start a project, an innovation project, and then realize halfway through you're not really interested in it anymore for whatever reason. And instead of stopping here, to actually still generate some revenue and some value out of it by pushing it out of the funnel. And this is where you can see that that funnel now is in dashed lines. And so this is an area where, a lot of software companies have done so. They invest a lot in researching new technology and then discover, this is not particularly applicable for us. Maybe you discover that, I know most of you are in the telecom industry, you discover a new sort of broadcasting mechanism, but it's not particularly helpful for your core market, but it could be used for military, for instance. And so you could license out that technology, find a new market outside of the boundaries of your firm. The counter to that is also that if you realize you should have been working on something for a while, you don't have to restart everything from scratch. You can partner with an established company that does it, license technology through legal means of IP licensing, acquire smaller companies or startup, and essentially get into that funnel, not from the beginning, but from somewhere in the middle. And the value of all of this is a couple of things. One, the velocity of your funnel is accelerated. Things move faster through it. The width of the funnel at the entry point is also wider, because instead of just relying on what people in your basement with the white light codes can come up with as far as ideas for business, etc., you rely on everyone in the company, and then even people outside, your partners, academia, and many others. So this is a very important concept to understand. And so I'd like to open the floor for a minute here and see if you guys have any examples of things like this happening. If you have any questions, if you want some concrete demonstration or something like that. Quiet group today. You guys need more coffee? Or... All right. You can still hear me, right? Can I see at least a little bit of action in the chat or some hands raised to know that you guys can hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you, and we're still awake. Don't worry.
Okay, great. I'm glad. Thank you for confirming. All right. So the other thing is that you realize that innovation really becomes a team sport, and every facet of the organization is not just involved and doesn't need to just innovate their own area, but now most innovation, especially when you think about digital transformation from within a company, kind of affects everyone. And so this is an area where a lot of the challenges happen. You have executives, sponsors from different teams like finance versus technology versus risk versus marketing or go-to-market or however you want to call that. And they each have their own goals. and maybe the different horizons, maybe Horizon 1 versus Horizon 2 and 3, they have different perspectives a little bit on how fast they want to innovate and improve how their teams function. But in reality, digital transformation to work at a company needs alignment, needs all of them to start overlapping. Because if you think about that little diagram here, and I know it's not meant to be readable per se, but the areas of responsibilities really do overlap. Your chief marketing officer, so CMO here, is going to have a lot of control over the consumer experience, the channels, and also some aspects of where the data is stored, things like CRM and marketing automation software, etc. But now you get into the area where the first one that I mentioned, the customer experience, that overlaps with your technology sector, your technology team, your CIO, your CTO. And the things on the bottom right here, again, you can't read them, that's fine. When you think about the product delivery, but also the experience by which the customers engage and what data is retained, that start interfacing and overlapping with your COO or your CISO. And so this is an area really where you can't emphasize enough the need for better collaboration. Otherwise, you end up pulling in a different direction, and that delays greatly the potential for change. So the problem is that most companies do this as a result. They see the need for alignment and they realize, rather than getting 5 people to agree to move in the same direction, it's just easier to hire someone, give them a fancy title, and rely on them and whatever team they build to actually get things done and do that innovation. And so a number of companies that I've worked with in the past do something kind of like what we have here in this little cartoon vision. You have somebody that's usually going to be chief transformation officer or chief digital officer. I've seen a few flavors of those titles, and they have a handful of people that work for them. They're isolated. They don't necessarily work in any of the business units. They don't work in any of the silos, which is initially thought of as a good thing. It's like they don't have the constraints of operating day to day, et cetera. But in reality, what that means is that outside of producing PowerPoints and spreadsheets, nothing really happens out of it. And so best practices, I don't think I have a slide on that, but I actually teach innovation to MBA students in Madrid, and I've done some research in the domain where essentially it has been demonstrated with real world data that the best innovation practice is to disseminate your innovators in the business units. So this structure that you see right here on the screen can be helpful at the beginning or as a little shell to coordinate a little bit, but really innovation and transformation cannot work unless you have people with the power to make changes in the existing P&Ls, in the existing businesses. Questions, comments? Applaud? All right, let's keep going. Now, one of the challenges that also happens is, innovation is everywhere. You have TV shows, both fictional and documentary style, that are romanticizing innovation. Now everybody wants to do it. Everybody thinks that they're an innovation expert. I like to joke that when I started my career, I was more in strategy. And one of my biggest frustration was that, I was a legitimate strategy professional, went for consulting, studied in the business school, and had strategy in my actual job title. And I would see everyone on LinkedIn with 0 strategy skills or credentials. Always, top skill for people on LinkedIn is like strategy. And it would drive me furious thinking, I have that skill. And now innovation is the same thing. Now everybody is calling themselves, a innovative thought leader, innovative strategic thinker, etc. When in reality, sure, everybody can have some degree of innovation within them, some innovation talent and some strategy talent, but it is a real skill set that demands a lot of dedication and actual expertise. And so I think the idea is innovation can be very confusing. You can just throw a bunch of words and it will look good on a page. And maybe people might even say, this is a good idea. Let's do it. Let's move forward. But to actually make sense of an innovation portfolio, whether using the 3 horizon that Vlas was mentioning earlier, or some other tools that we'll talk about in the next half hour or so, relying on people that have legitimate expertise is actually one of my favorite recommendations versus just trying to wing it yourself. Now, one of the key aspects of that is also the ability to differentiate the different sort of shades or magnitude of innovation. If you think about it, all of us have experienced the digital transformation to some extent, but in reality, sometimes it's not full-blown digital transformation. The way that we used to procure, I'll use a cell phone example again, because I know you guys are mostly from that industry. The way that the consumer experience has changed from that perspective, the ability to manage your plan by going online and not just having to walk to a store to do something like that. The ability to even select your plan online and configure it, etc. Those are things that we take for granted now, but have been transformational changes in the industry. The flip side is there's also a lot of smaller changes that are not maybe as glamorous, but are still a journey towards transformation. And this is how it happens usually. You may not remember right now, but when that journey started happening, we didn't go from having to go to a store, fill out some actual paperwork, walking out with a phone, to what we have today, where I can order a phone online, configure maybe live chat with an agent, and then make changes to my plan by just moving things on a web page. We went through multiple steps along the way. And so one of those first steps is digitization. And I think there's a couple of you that work in procurement, so I'll use that as an example. But digitization is the same thing as moving away from receiving a paper PO, purchase order, and scanning it, and into actually thinking through, well, maybe instead of having people fill out a spreadsheet, print it and fax it or whatever, we can create a web form. And that's step one. Then step two would be still not quite transformation, but reimagining this process, thinking, well, maybe instead of just filling out the form, we can do something where there's some workflow element, where when they fill out the form, if there's an answer that is flagged by the system as being unsatisfactory, we can automatically inform the supplier, please, you forgot to attach the NDA to the file, or you forgot to attach your SOC 2 report for security or something like this. And so this is when you rethink a little bit, just with the perspective of leveraging technology to optimize the process. But in reality, where digital transformation is real, when you have reached that final state, is if you think about it as if that business was created from day one. And so I think Vlas, I only caught the very tail end of it, but was showing you like a neobank and other, digital native financial services company. And it is fascinating to see how they do it. Everything is done in a massively different way than how traditional banks are doing it, because they just don't have the legacy of knowing, well, we used to do this form. We used to have this process. We have to have people go to a branch, and we need to keep the bank branch relevant. It's completely forgetting about all that legacy and just thinking, okay, what is the essential need? Maybe it's not even a bank. It's just people want a place to store their money. Forget that it's called a bank, because a bank comes with a bunch of definitions. It's just a place for people to store their money and being able to access it or utilize it in a way that is rewarding to them. And so if you think about that from that perspective, this is when you really unlock the potential to transform what you're doing. So communication, go ahead.
Matthew, yes, you mentioned a full digital transformation. So is there a way to measure the digital transformation? For example, the example you mentioned about the procurement. Mm-hmm. So is it that the whole process is paperless? This is a full digital transformation? Or how can we measure this?
Yeah, so it's going to depend enormously on, each process, like procurement. And then what you want to do is you want to build sort of like a maturity scale. You realize where you are, and then you think about, okay, what is level 1, level 2, and maybe something like 5 levels. In the case of procurement, for instance, you could think about, okay, you can digitize everything, and that's great. But what about automating? Maybe a fully digitally transformed procurement system is actually something where you also take inventory of what you have. And when you have a new employee that starts, the system automatically verifies, okay, do we have a laptop and a keyboard and a mouse to send this new employee? And if not, automatically sends a PO to the vendor to get that fulfilled. When you start adding not just, digital aspects and data, but if you can remove the people pushing the button and do some intelligent automation, then you get really into the realm of, higher level. it's a journey that never really ends, right? Because technology keep advancing. And so eventually you realize, well, what we did was the best that can be done at the time. And then a few years later, it becomes even easier. I mean, I'll give you an example right now. In my world of insurance, in auto insurance, for many, many years, software that does estimating, you take a picture and you upload the picture and it tries to estimate, how big is the damage from your accident. One of the limitations before was just, need images. At first, it was people that had seen hundreds of thousands of images and were able to tell you by looking at a picture, I think it's going to be $5,000. Then obviously you have digital images, and so you can have those people that are doing it remotely or whatever. But then you could use AI. And for AI, you need to collect a lot of images, and then you can do even better is that now you can generate synthetic data. You can create fake images to train the AI. And then, over time, maybe you'll be looking at video instead of a static image. Somebody can walk around the vehicle and record, from multiple angles, and therefore the quality of the estimate will be even better. So it never really ends. There's not like a final stage where you can say, okay, done. I'm fully transformed now, moving on. Does that answer your question, Ahmed?
Yeah, just a last question. So from the insurance example, can I move from point number 1 to point number 5? Or I shall follow a specific pattern because maybe using an AI or something like this is a little bit complicated or hard for a company moving from still pictures for the insurance?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is that some steps, it will be best to skip them. And an example of that from your world is, Africa, for instance, as a continent, mostly skipped a lot of the 1G and 2G mobile era, right? The companies were basically from no phone or just like landline and immediately into the smartphone era. And so banking likewise went from almost no banking in some areas directly into level 4 of like neobanks with microcredit, etc. And so sometimes there is one step in the process, step 2, let's call it, that just doesn't make sense anymore. And so if you're still at step 1, it would be a waste of time to try to do step 2, just jump straight to like 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that. And then the other thing is you have to acknowledge sometimes the people that were doing step 1 don't have the skill set to do step 5 right away. You mentioned, AI is complicated, etc. And so it's a question for the organization. Do we want to take our time, retain the same people, but train them, which could take, several years to really go from a certain skill set to a much more modern skill set? Or do we want to partner to bypass this, outsource everything? It depends really on, how aggressive you want to do it and what are the things that you're willing to do in that pursuit of going from stage 1 to stage 5.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. One of the big challenges too, and I know, I've been a victim of this as well, just as we were talking, going straight into AI and synthetic data and all that. But the challenge is that while I do believe in the value of experts, to help you guide you along that journey, there's a problem in that most experts make a living by being very bold. Nobody wants to pay an expert $1 million to tell you to improve something by 1%. And so everybody is always trying to think about, well, how can you do like basically the new iPhone for your industry? Or, stage 5 AI, as you and I were just talking about. But in reality, sometimes you're not quite ripe. Your organization is not quite ripe for it. And so what I want to do for a couple of minutes is just think about a different framework, very kind of like simplistic, to think about, what are the many things that you can do? And so you can create value for innovation with things that are not necessarily fully transformative. It's helpful to still think about it in 3 different ways. One is that a vitamin? And, a vitamin is not keeping you alive. It's not solving a major problem, but it's improving your day-to-day a little bit. It's keeping you maybe living a little bit longer, maybe jump a little higher or whatever. And so when you think about innovation, think about whether this is a vitamin or a painkiller. Is this an area where, as your business grows, you have to keep hiring more and more people to scan documents, you have to do things that don't add much value and are really painful? And so those innovations would be painkillers. They solve a complex problem that is disruptive to your company. And then the one that you need to stay away from, because the first two are valuable just in different ways, is candy. And that's the distraction stuff. And there is so much of it going on these days where people innovate for the sake of innovation. And we'll have a little side chat about it in a few minutes, but sometimes it's difficult to understand. I mean, I don't know how your LinkedIn and your email inboxes are, but mine is full every day for at least 4 or 5 different pitches on like, oh, you should try this tool and that tool, and my company is doing XYZ, and we can transform how you do this thing or that thing. And so much of it is sort of wasteful, right? You think about it right now, NFTs, I'm a believer in NFTs. They're fine and all of that, but there's still so much noise, right? So much of that industry is just utter garbage. And so the ability to look at something and realize, okay, this company that's proposing to store our customer data as NFTs and give them, a little NFT when every 6 months that they don't cancel their cell phone plan, is that a vitamin? Is that going to help me, improve retention maybe? Is that a painkiller where it could replace my billing system or my loyalty program and actually, scale better, more efficiently, etc.? Or is that just candy? Is that just somebody that knows that there's a hot buzzword right now going on and just throwing this at us and hoping that we buy? Let me check the chat. I think I may have a question. Okay, thank you for the comment. All right, so thinking back at innovation, we talked about how innovation is inevitable. You have to do it. You don't really have a choice if you want to stick around. Now, you can do it with sort of 3 different mindsets. The first one is to do it for growth, which is obviously the most desirable one because it's like higher aspiration, right? You do it because you want to better yourself or better your company. Then sometimes you do it for survival. Some companies don't really love the idea of innovation, but they realize that if they don't do it, they're just not going to be around. So they do it for survival. And then going back to that candy analogy, we have some folks that do innovation sort of for innovation's sake. And so we talked about the negative aspects of it. Like I will talk even more about the negative aspect, but there are some positive aspects of it as well. I don't want to discourage people. I myself fall victim to this quite often. I love innovation. I love, tinkering with stuff. And so I will do a lot of stuff that sometimes there's no real justification for it, but I still think there can be some actual benefits down the line. So first of all, why innovate for growth? Well, you can do a few things, right? One is just create new revenue lines where you essentially, through your innovation, which is usually a product innovation, can be a channel innovation, but usually you innovate in such a way that basically in your P&L, you can add a line now. So I have the example here is like a smart oven. You sell an oven, and that was your old business model. The oven is worth $700. And that's it. That's your revenue model, is a transactional one-time fee that people pay you. And then you realize, what if we make it smart? And we put a camera in the oven, and the camera can tell what type of food has been put in the oven and recommend a cooking time. Full disclosure, I have one of those. It's great. But it comes with a subscription, because then, you can subscribe to the app so that the recipes are implemented directly in the oven. And what that does is that for the oven manufacturer, it's a new revenue line. You have in your P&L revenue line of units times price, and then you have the recurring subscription fees. Now, innovation can be done not so much to create new types of revenue and new lines in your P&L, but just as an expansion. It's using technology, and those are usually going to be channel innovation, not so much product itself, but using new channels to essentially expand the universe, your total addressable market. If you think about, I don't know, what would be a good example here? I guess books could be one of those, right? You have audiences of people that are within walking distance. If you're a company that sells books about a particular topic, that sell, I don't know, the books about health history, then innovation might be to, decide to start selling online your custom books or very, first editions and whatever. And so by innovating your distribution channel, you can reach new audiences. You don't depend on people with being within a walking distance of your store. I have the K-pop example here. Some artists have always been global, but now even smaller artists that are not that famous yet can actually use innovation reaching through social media, TikTok, Instagram, and all others, to start expanding the reach of their offering and selling, independently on things like Bandcamp or Shopify to new audiences. And then eventually you have innovation that allows you to have new pricing power. And so Tesla does this, for instance, right? They can sell you features that are just software enabled. And so that's another aspect of doing that for growth. Now, the other main reason why companies throw themselves into the innovation deep end is for survival. It's not that they really want to do it, but they realize that if they don't do it, if they don't go through digital transformation, they just won't exist. And here are the three main things that motivate that. Number one, channel migrations. If all of your customers are switching the way or the location where they acquire something, then you have to innovate to distribution. And we've seen that, I think by now, most companies, even if they're not digital native, realize that, the power of digital distribution. But for a while, and still in some sectors, you get to the point where people realize this is not how it works. I mean, in the restaurant business, that's still happening, right? Small businesses used to do everything owned. And so if you wanted to place an order and get your pizza delivered, you had to call the actual pizza store or pizza restaurant that is in your neighborhood or whatever, and call them directly. And then what happened? DoorDash, Uber Eats, all of those people aggregated everything, created a new channel. And all of us collectively forgot that you can call the pizza restaurant directly. You cannot call the pizzeria anymore. Like, everybody has moved. And so the number of calls kept decreasing. And so for all of the small businesses to survive, they had to realize they have to move their channel from just having an employee that's dedicated to answering the phone to actually, engaging with, again, Uber Eats and all of those guys. The second reason is when you are a legacy company, which and most of you are. I know the companies that you're with, they're like 100 years old or more. You have a legacy of doing things a certain way. And then you get to a point where companies that have started more recently have a different cost structure and operate in a radically different way. And so you have to innovate in order to remain competitive on pricing. We're seeing that since it's almost lunchtime here, and I already used a restaurant example. I'll give you a restaurant example here again. Have you heard of ghost kitchens? Anybody familiar with ghost kitchens? Can you speak up and explain what that is? Nobody's heard of ghost kitchens yet?
No, I haven't personally.
Okay. Ghost kitchens are restaurants that don't actually have a place for you to eat. They are kitchens that are sometimes in existing restaurants, or sometimes actually just in a warehouse somewhere. And there's not really any waitress or servers, etc. It is just a kitchen, and then they sell online. And if you go onto, again, DoorDash or Uber Eats or Ritual or any of those, it looks just like any other restaurant, except it is only a virtual kitchen, if you will, or cloud kitchen. Sometimes it's ghost kitchen, sometimes it's cloud kitchen. They have different names for it. And actually, some of these kitchens do multiple things. It is one kitchen, with a handful of ovens, etc. But online, they have like 3 different names. And so you and I, Heba and I might be ordering lunch, and we think we're ordering from 2 different places. I'm ordering pizza, and she's ordering, I don't know, kebab or something. And, we even see different logos. I'm ordering from, Vlas's Pizzeria, and she's ordering from Ahmed Kebab. And in reality, it's the same people that are making it. It's just a different logo and a different pseudo experience. And so the challenge is that if you think about it, the cost structure of a restaurant, you have the back of the house, which is where the kitchen is. And then you have the front of the house, which is where all of the tables are, etc. And when you pay your rent, usually the surface area of the front of the house is much bigger. And so maybe 2/3 of your rent is for the front of the house. And also you have servers and busboys, etc., that are, obviously people, staff that you have to pay. And so if you think about it, like these companies cannot really effectively, on pricing at least, compete with cloud or ghost kitchens. And so they have to figure out, okay, how else do we compete? Could be innovation by providing, a more interesting rewards program, or maybe they have to innovate their go-to-market so that they really capture the people that are within the vicinity and rely less on deliveries because they'll never win delivery against cloud kitchens that can, again, discount the prices, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
Makes sense.
a question here that
Yeah.
around the innovation in order to survive, in some cases it can also be considered for growth. It depends, or this is how I see it. I'm sharing this thought. I don't know. It depends. If we use an example around the channel migration, if I'm an organization that decided at a point of time to migrate the channel make it through e-commerce or whatever in order to grow or increase revenue. But maybe in another example, I'm an organization that is following the competitors in order to survive. So maybe this is how I see it. I'm not sure this is right or wrong, but
it's absolutely right. Yeah, you're 100% right. You can do some things for both reasons, right? It's like we have to migrate the channel because otherwise we'll die. But as we're doing the migration, let's do it well so we can grow, because that new migration, that new channel maybe can expand the number of audiences that we can reach. Maybe by selling to this new channel, if it's delivery, for instance, we can have a new revenue line because people are willing to pay for the delivery. So you're 100% correct. Those are not mutually exclusive. Good question, though.
Thank you.
And then the final one, same thing, it's for survival, but it can actually be a positive thing. And this is actually a perfect segue. The example that I have on the page, I'll give you a restaurant example because we're on the theme, but like, customers, it used to be that if you like music, you can either buy a single. I don't know how many of you even remember that, but you'd buy a CD with just like one song on it, or you can buy the whole album. And that was whatever, like $10, $15, and you have the entire CD of the whole, every song that this artist has put together in an album. And then customers were actually somewhat dissatisfied with that. Like, well, I want to buy one song, but not just that one that's been promoted as a single. I want to buy just, song number 17 from this album. And so iTunes changed that. iTunes changed how we feel about music, and then Spotify and Deezer and others have also changed the idea of like, oh, I want all the music. And I don't want to pay per song. I just want to pay a subscription and have access to anything I want. And so sometimes, same thing, if you're still just selling CDs or selling the music as a whole package, like you can have only one song that we chose or the whole album and nothing in between, then you may not survive because the expectations have changed. On the restaurant side, people, especially during the pandemic here in North America, the expectations have shifted. People don't really want to interact, especially at fast food, for like an experience that's not meant to be great anyway. People don't even want to interact with the cashier. And so a lot of companies are doing cashierless stores now. You come in and there's a big screen and you order there, and you don't actually interact with anybody. You just type in your order on a giant screen, and then somebody will hand you the bag with your food. Again, this is something we'll see. I think this one, I'm not sure if it will stick around or not. I think it might stick around because of cost, maybe not customer experience per se, but that's an evolution in that space, sticking to the restaurant theme. And then the third one, so we talked about doing innovation just for the sake of doing innovation. You do it, you don't really know why, it's just everybody else is doing it, so might as well do it. And here are the three main reasons why you have to be careful when you do that. Number one, repainting. This one I love because I've seen it so many times where I've seen two examples of that. One is people try to pretend that something that's not particularly cool is cool. And a company I was with for a long time, they changed the name of their conference rooms from letters to things like Shark Tank and, Innovation Cloud or whatever. And that somehow, that was considered, see, we changed. We have an innovation culture now. What used to be called Conference Room M is now called Shark Tank. Congratulations. I've seen even worse. I've seen executive, because we actually implemented something very difficult, is trying to account for innovation. We try to implement something of like, you need to call out in a revenue from innovation in your P&L. And then we just got people doing management accounting, reclassifying things like, well, this product's been around for 5 years, but we have a new feature. Let's reclassify our revenue as innovation so we can pretend that 20% of revenue comes from innovation. So very dangerous to do, because then you fool yourself into thinking you're innovative and you dilute the value of what that really means. And also the real innovators in your company don't want to be around this sort of BS, I think is the technical term I'm looking for. The second one, also very dangerous, is cargo cults. Anybody familiar with what a cargo cult is? Have you ever heard of that term? All right, so a cargo cult is something, a real phenomenon, very fascinating, that happened in like the Polynesian Islands, close to New Zealand and Australia, etc. Those islands were for a long time undiscovered. And so the world was, in the 19th century, the world was becoming more global. You had ships that were sailing from India to Great Britain and France. Australia was becoming, a real nation. And so the modern world was happening. You had cargo ships, eventually even planes and things like that. But some of those islands were undiscovered and still, native tribes with no technology. And on occasion, a plane or a boat would crash or sink or capsize, and somehow would end up on one of those islands. And what happened is, imagine you're in a tribe and you're wearing coconuts for bras and all of that, and suddenly you see a shipping container cargo full of mechanical objects that you never could have imagined, like typewriters and whatever. And so they started creating religions or cults around it. The entire island would go and pray towards the container full of typewriter that was meant to go to Japan or whatever. Long example, in technology and in innovation, we see that a lot. With a lot of companies, you will have one executive that reads a book on Agile, and then they don't really understand any of it, but they understand that Agile usually comes with what's called a stand-up meeting, where everybody stands up and only speaks for like a couple seconds. Oh, today I'm working on the project to redo the advertising campaign. And so that's what a lot of companies will do. They will pretend to be innovative by worshiping the god of innovation without understanding anything about it. And so likewise, these becomes very unproductive and a waste of time. And people convince themselves that we're doing innovation because we're doing Agile or what have you. And in reality, this is just a show. And then finally, well, I do love innovation, and I think that experimentation can lead to phenomenal things. Google famously told its employees early on, that's not really true anymore, spend 20% of your time doing anything that motivates you. We really don't care what it is. And that is how Google Map and Gmail happened. But in reality, if everybody is doing that, you may end up wasting a lot of time. And so I think what example do I have here? If a hotel chain decides to do blockchain tracking of room booking, maybe it's a fun project for somebody in the technology group to work on, but maybe it's not the best use of time. So it can be quite distracting. Now, the counter to that is that even if you do those things, those kind of ridiculous things, you do Agile without really knowing why, or you do some blockchain projects without any good reason, you can still actually benefit from it. One is you'll get talent. You'll get people that are just genuinely interested. I mean, right now, if you do some blockchain stuff, you will get the best developers because that's what they're interested in. And the top talent is, interested in new technologies, even when they haven't really found their product market fit. And so you can attract better people if you do innovation, even if sometimes you don't really do the right kind of innovation, if you will. The second thing is you can be very passive, and I'll keep talking blockchain and NFT because I know it's very popular these days. You can just read a bunch of blogs and podcasts and form your opinion about whether or not this is going to change your industry by just listening to other people. Or you could just do a small project. One of your team, tries to do something with it, and you will learn 10 times more. Actually, I have a quote. I wonder where it is. It's probably coming up a little bit later, but I have a quote that I'll give you that goes to that spirit. And then eventually, the third one is, you may get an unexpected idea. Maybe you work on, again, if you're a hotel, company, let's say, again, you're in the cellular industry, you implement a blockchain tracking of loyalty programs, and maybe that's a dumb idea, but in doing so, you actually realize that this could actually apply really well to, I don't know, procurement, and having all of your supplier contracts and NDAs and POs tracked in the blockchain could actually be good. And so sometimes keeping an open mind to people and ideas and projects can actually yield benefits beyond the initial scope, even when the initial scope was already kind of silly to begin with. Questions, comments? All right, moving on then. Couple things about how to actually get it done. We'll talk strategy, we'll talk sort of the more practical matters, and then I'll give you a few resources that I find useful that cut across an industry, and then we'll save some time for more Q&A. Hopefully you guys will be a little bit less shy by then. So strategy tools, those are very famous. Everybody is likely familiar with them, but nevertheless, I want to cover them and also give you some of my own perspective on them. Lean Canvas as a sort of template for how to articulate, an innovation idea, a new business idea, using a simplified model that doesn't take weeks to build and can make it easier to compare different ones, and also is quite comprehensive. Make sure you don't forget about a particular aspect of it, like distribution or partnerships, etc. Design thinking as a method, but also more as a mindset of just always thinking from a point of view of empathy and thinking in the shoes of the buyer or the user, rather than just, oh, we have this technology, what else could we do with it, which is very internally focused. And then agile, likewise, agile, I like to make fun of it because it's usually very misused. But the underlying philosophy of agile is actually very much like lean, which is just about, be flexible, break down big things into smaller things, and that way that gives you room to iterate and adapt. But the one I like the most is the one I created, and I don't have a cool name for it, so I just call it the 3D model of innovation portfolio. 3D, why? Because 3 dimensions, like a cube, and here's what goes in. I think that you should think about innovation for a company the same way that you should think about your innovation portfolio. It depends on your age. If you're 20 years old, you don't invest in the same things, and if you're 55 and about to retire in the next 5 to 10 years, if you have a risk appetite, or if you think that you're going to relocate, to a foreign country, you do different tax optimization strategies. The bottom line is every company will have a different innovation strategy that's right for it. And I like to think of those strategies in 3 dimensions and have a balanced portfolio. The first one is approaches. What are like the things that you do to innovate? Do you go all in and hire a team, which again, I know there are pros and cons, mostly cons. Do you do something like an entrepreneur program? Maybe you think as an organization, you don't have strong innovation, but you think in your talent pool, you have strong innovators. And so you can create a program to try to leverage that. Do you think you just need a booster shot? Very timely with COVID, where, on occasion, once a quarter, twice a year, or whatever, you need an event like a hackathon or something to like re-energize people and get a few, new injections of new ideas. Do you do what you're doing virtually today, an innovation excursion? Vlas and I, I've done those for many years, but usually we do them in person. People will sometimes, fly to Silicon Valley and meet us. And that's one way to, again, re-energize a team and align on things. So the approach is sort of like the first dimension. What are the activities that you do that can trigger more innovation or realign people by putting them together or help you get new ideas, et cetera, et cetera. Dimension 1. Dimension 2, we talked a little bit about earlier, is to think about, you can't put all of your innovation eggs in one basket like product. Innovation is not just about creating a new product and maybe adding your features to it. It can also be about how you do your distribution channels, as we talked about. It could be about your profit model. How do you actually price this? Do you start offering, credit and that's your innovation to, reach new audiences that cannot buy your product as is and are not going to take a loan. But if the loan is baked in the purchase process, like with Klarna and others, then maybe that is an innovation that actually significantly affects your addressable market. So that's the second dimension, right? It's like, okay, make sure that you do different activities. Maybe, you know, once a year you do a hackathon, and then once a year you do an excursion to meet with other companies that are in your industry. And then second dimension, making sure that you don't only do one type of innovation. Even if there's a channel migration, that you still need to innovate your product itself or the network of, you know, your vendors, et cetera, to help you build the thing. And then the third dimension, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, is going to be the magnitude. It's like, how big of a bet is it? Is it just incremental? And here I have the Amazon example. You know, Amazon started as a place to buy books, eventually buy everything. But if you think about it, like, it is really a marketplace. And so if you are in that bottom left corner with existing product, existing market, an innovation can be something like the one-click checkout, where, you know, now you literally, if you're logged in, you only do one click to buy something. And there's nothing wrong with it. It is not something that is as revolutionary as like the Kindle, the e-reader, or the Fire phone, which did not work, but, you know, still was a very bold idea. But this is kind of what you need to have. You need to have a portfolio of ideas that are kind of all across. Some things that are on the bottom left, and some things that are in the top right, and all over. So overall, just like your personal investment portfolio should have, you know, some bonds, some stocks, maybe some crypto, some NFC, a good company strategy should have a mixture of all those things. You should be cognizant of, you know, are we doing the right types of activities for our level of maturity? Should we do more types of activities and approaches? Are we innovating in the different areas of the business? And are we making bets that are not, you know, all of them are a little bit too risk averse, or all of them are too risky? And that's how you build, in my opinion, a robust innovation strategy. Questions, comments? All right, let's move on then. Second to last comment. Innovation is often thought about this, you know, genius idea that you have. You're in the shower and suddenly you come up with an idea for a phenomenal new product or a new way to reach your audiences, et cetera, et cetera. In reality, this is very misleading, because the idea is less than half of what makes innovation or digital transformation work. Really, where things happen is mostly in the execution. So there's this little thing right here that I like. It shows you the value of excelling at both. And so you can see the value here. If you have a horrible idea, it's worth $0. And then you think about the execution as a multiplier. And so the multiplier for bad execution is worth 10x. Good execution is worth 1,000x. And so the way it works is, okay, if you have a bad idea, but very good execution, it could be $1 million idea or $1 million business. And so a dumb example that I like is the $1 million homepage. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. This is kind of old, actually. It's probably almost 20 years old, but someone created a web page with 1 million pixels and sold each pixel for $1. So the idea is not great, right? It doesn't scale. It's only 1 million pixel and that's it. But the execution, generating some noise around it, making it go viral, ended up with this super dumb idea, super simple, making $1 million. If you think about a very good idea with horrible execution, that's most startups. A lot of them, if you see the pitch deck, it's easy to fall in love. Like, oh my God, they're going to revolutionize this, revolutionize that, and they raise some money, but then the execution is bad, and that's why most of them fail. And then you have sometimes something, you know, that happens like Amazon, $1 trillion valuation, great ideas, great execution. And that's the difference, right? The idea of an online bookstore is not necessarily, I mean, it's a great idea, an online marketplace, but that alone is not worth $1 trillion. It's only worth $1 trillion if your execution is also great. Otherwise, a lot of them with the same idea, but just average execution end up being, you know, much, much smaller. Final aspect on execution, besides emphasizing, you know, that it's really important, how do you get it done? Get help. again, we talked about experts and the risks of ignoring them and thinking you can do it all. It's helpful to have someone come in that is not blinded by 10 years of being in the same industry or more, having preconceived ideas of what the company is willing to do and what is not willing to do, and just being able to push you a little bit, push you beyond the boundaries of your comfort zone. The second thing is to start as soon as you can, and I think that's also aligned with the lean canvas and all of that. Don't overthink, don't start modeling all sorts of scenario based on hypothetical things. The best thing that you can do is to start doing, build an MVP, and I'll do a little test, because not everything is a product, so not everything the MVP concept will apply, but start doing some tests immediately and get real world feedback, not just passing a PowerPoint around to 50 people where they always think that they have to add something because that justifies their existence. Just actually do something. And then finally, make sure you have goals. Make sure that you don't innovate just because it's cool, but that you can show, I'm doing this because I think it's going to help us reduce the cost of providing our new employees with their office equipment. I'm doing this because I think it's going to reduce the churn. Set a goal somewhere. You can always change it later, but having a goal that motivates and aligns people is important. And here's a quote that I've been looking for earlier, which was going back to why you should start acting and build as soon as you can. When you build something, you get the actual thing, but even more valuable is how you've grown and changed from the process of building that thing. And that's Johnny Ive, who is essentially, there was a lead designer at Apple for I think about a decade when they launched all of their most successful products, like the new Mac, the iPhone, etc. All right, final thing before we go into Q&A, resources. You guys are in this program. That means you are inherently motivated to get better at innovation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And so what are the ways to get better at it? One is to get data, be able to do market research by saying, okay, I'm interested in, I don't know, drone inspections for cell phone towers. Well, you could potentially find them on Google, etc. But it's just a lot easier if you use something like Crunchbase or PitchBook or OddUp to look at the list of them, see who has raised the most money, etc., etc. And so those tools can be helpful to just like quickly understand, which markets are growing. That's the one that are raising a lot of money, year over year, and which ones are maybe not growing quite as fast. The second thing is following the news. Like, I am always blown away by the amount of people that once I get into an industry, I'll use insurance where I am right now. A lot of my colleagues know what's happening in the industry. They can tell you about what State Farm and other big companies are doing. They have no idea what's happening in the world outside of insurance. They don't know, that what's the name? Stable Diffusion was released last week, which is a new AI generating images tool, which could actually be helpful down the line for our business. But until an insurance-related website or publication talks about it, they will never know of it. And so that's really bad. If you want to be good at innovation, you have to always keep your eye to the market and your ear to the street and understand what people are getting excited about, not just in your industry, but beyond it. Conferences and trade show, same thing, kind of like for market intelligence overall. Communities, in most industries, you will have people that form sort of like fringe communities. They're like micro events, micro trade shows that are more geared towards like the future of the industry rather than just a legacy established business. But there's also a lot of other communities online, either on Hacker News, The Hustle, AngelList, even on Reddit, people that are hyper specialized in something and that talk a lot about what's happening in the industry, what's happening in their world. And those are very, very rich in information. And then eventually, also people, make sure that you follow a lot of people either in person and try to network. Serendipity is extremely important in innovation. And so to the extent that you can, go attend some various events, go to a co-working place once a month or something like this. Like it is, I cannot emphasize how important it is. I use a service, I don't know if it's available in your region, but called Lunch Club. Every week, Lunch Club pairs me with somebody randomly in Chicago that's also signed up, and we go meet for coffee. And so we do that because there are available spaces where we can do that. But I mean, frankly, we could even do it at a coffee shop or whatever. And forcing yourself to have a conversation with someone that is completely different from you is something where over time you amass, contacts, but also experience and perspectives. The types of questions people will ask you about your job, about your industry, are actually very helpful to help you reframe your perspective and rethink what you should be doing. So that's the gist of what I had. I was hoping for a little bit more lively conversation, but maybe you guys saved it all for the Q&A session. So I'm all yours. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. You said something about having a structure for digital transformation with something like a head of digital transformation, and the whole structure is not the best way to embrace the digital transformation in a company. How else can we do this? I mean, what are the alternative ways to embrace this culture or this and encourage people to go for digital transformation?
Thank you. So the question is really around how to structure an innovation team. And research shows that the best way is to disseminate the innovators across the business. If you have a centralized innovation team, but there is nobody that reports to them that is actually operating in the business, then this is where things fail. If you have a centralized team, but you also have people that are responsible for innovation inside the business units, then it can work. But if you don't have that much availability, you're better off not putting 5 people in a room together that is disconnected from the rest of the organization. You're better off putting those 5 people into your 5 business units and letting them, basically operate from within. The reason for that is that the cultural aspect of changing for innovation really involves a lot of ownership on both sides, right? You need both the creator of a driver of innovation to feel ownership towards the product or the business unit that they're trying to change. Otherwise, their ideas or suggestions are going to be disconnected from reality and they don't feel accountable. It's just like, oh, I'm going to suggest something cool like a consultant would do, but I don't really care how it does. It's not my business unit. Basically, people think that, they're compensated for how pretty their PowerPoint decks are, not for the real impact. When you hire consultants, you're effectively doing that centralized innovation team, right? And they create beautiful PowerPoints. And then when things fail, they're like, well, it's not my problem. My PowerPoint was beautiful. It's the execution that sucked.
Yeah.
So you have to really put these people inside the business. That way, when they talk to others, they're on the same team. There's a shared identity, there's a shared ownership. And also the innovators, quote unquote, themselves feel really vested in, like, if I'm making this recommendation, it better work because that is my business. Like, my part of my compensation is tied to how well this business unit is growing, et cetera, et cetera. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You can type questions in the chat if you prefer, or you can speak up, whatever works best for you. And by the way, I'll copy this presentation will be available online. It's not a PowerPoint, I just made a page for it. So I'll put it in the chat. That way it's available anytime you need it. Anybody else? All right, quiet group. I will say, oh, maybe someone in the chat.
No,
okay.
It's just thank you.
So final note then, since I have a couple of minutes extra, but I hope this came across, but I'm actually extremely passionate about this topic. That's why I teach it. That's why I do these kinds of talks. If you come up with something later on, if I can be of help, find me on LinkedIn, use my contact information here. I have had countless interactions with folks that have gone through SVIC programs. Sometimes it's just, one extra phone call with one team that want to really go down into, topics for whatever, either a particular function like procurement we talked about, or a particular industry. Sometimes it's one individual that wants some career advice. Either way, I love that stuff. And so feel free to reach out. I'd be honored and happy to help any of you.
Thank you, Matthew.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
Hope you have a great rest of your program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.